In this episode, we have a series of meaty questions from our Facebook group members. In fact, some of these questions require a little more nuance than we can fit into a simple written post, so we're answering them on the podcast to give you some greater insights.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to move it along and become homeowners. But most importantly, it is for you to become an educated home buyer.
I'm Meighan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum. But it's a good thing because between us we've got over 45 years experience to share with you and bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together we're going to make sure you get unbiased and real information you can rely on. Allow us to guide you on your home buying journey. We want you to become an educated home buyer so that you can stop looking for your first home and actually become a proud homeowner.
We've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au, and there you'll get access to our free mini course, How to Price a Property Like a Professional. You will also find the holy grail of home buying education, Your First Home Buyer Guide, the online course for people who want to become educated home buyers. We created this for you to help you get on the right path to home ownership for your first home and beyond.
But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, we've got the boring bit, the disclaimer. You of course know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording. Things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority and your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today we're answering some first home buyer questions from our Facebook group, and many of them are either or questions as people explore their options before they make a decision. But before we get into that, what's your house this week, Meighan?
Well, those of you who follow along for a long time may remember that I scuba dive and I love turtles. If I can find a turtle when I'm underwater, I'm going to spend a lot of time with it. This is on a Facebook group called Turtle Lovers. I don't know that I really want to live in a turtle, but, it kind of caught my attention.
They do carry their house on their back and a bit like a snail, I guess. That's what they're looking for. There's something for everyone, isn't there, in Facebook?
There is something for everybody.
A friend of mine introduced me to I Love Cows Facebook page, and I haven't seen a cow house, but I do love a bit of a cow.
Find it. I'm sure it exists.
All right, so let's get into the questions. You want to kick us off with our first one, Meighan?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. It's someone who is obviously a first home buyer, and their question is, terrace houses worth it? It doesn't seem like a good deal considering land build cost ratio. So, as always, Veronica, it depends.
The answer is it depends. And I think what's great about the questions we get is that our listeners, we know that you all think deeply about your decisions in terms of your home buying process. And obviously in a Facebook group, we get sort of some real insights into the way people are thinking. And in fact, in some of the other questions we've got in this episode, we've got specific ones about specific areas and specific decisions. So this is sort of like the broadest one. And I think when we're looking at this one in terms of a terrace house, that is a house that's in a row that's attached to other houses versus freestanding versus, a house sitting on its own plot.
No common walls.
That's it. And, I think when land is cheap, then you'd be nuts to go for a terrace house. You're best to go for a freestanding house when land is not expensive. And of course, it's all relative because, we know first home buyers, it doesn't matter where you're buying, the land is expensive. But, land in Sydney is very expensive. You'll find a lot of terrace houses. Land in Perth, even though the market's been shooting up.
Outskirts of Perth, so, some of those newer developments.
Or the outskirts of Sydney for that matter. I mean, regional land is, the further away you get from expensive centres, land is cheaper, right? So therefore, that's why we say it depends. So if you are in an area where land is cheap, then, you're better to go for a freestanding house. There's one reason why you don't get a lot of double-storey houses where land is cheap. But where land is expensive, and certainly think the inner city of Sydney, a terrace block and a terrace house on a small block of land can still be an A-grade asset. In fact, over the years, I've bought terrace houses on blocks as small as 120 square metres. I mean, in the right suburb, that's a decent-sized block of land.
It is, and it's all about context. And as you point out there, that context is, if you're looking at a terrace house in Balmain, for example, or in Petrie Terrace in Brisbane or Spring Hill, then there's lots of these types of properties because they were built a long time ago.
Mhm.
They've got history, they've got character, they're sought after, and it's not unusual to find, as you said, 120 square metres, 200 square metres. Red Hill, which is just next to Paddington where my business is, the average block size there is 250 square metres. These, because they're so close to the city, the context is it's acceptable, it's normal. People seek it out because it is still close to all the facilities they want. But if you put that same property out in Springfield or Mango Hill or the outer areas where you should be looking for a bigger block of land, then they're unusual. They're probably not going to be as sought after. So your resale potentially could be quite compromised.
Yeah. Now, we would certainly not rule out terraces or townhouses for that matter, which is like a modern equivalent, if they are well located in desirable areas with practical floor plans and a good indoor-outdoor connection as well. We like balanced properties. And in these circumstances, in expensive areas, they can give families an opportunity to buy into suburbs where otherwise they'd be priced out. They can't afford a freestanding home. And so it does give people options to buy into an area where for them, it's, go back to the 3 Ps when we're talking about the where to buy process. For them, position is really, really super important, and they will compromise on things such as common walls, small blocks of land in order to be there. So in some cases, that's why we say it depends. In some cases, terrace houses and townhouses are absolutely worth it and really good decisions for first home buyers, but not always.
Yeah, we kind of glossed over it a little bit, but that layout, that floor plan, it's so important in every property that you look at. So don't just think because you're buying an inner city area that you can go, oh, well, the layout's a bit clunky, but, we'll deal with it.
Yeah.
Just have a think about how other people might deal with it when you go to sell it, because that can be one of the biggest reasons that one townhouse or terrace performs quite well and another one really doesn't, even though they might have on paper the same features, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom.
Yep.
If the layout's not right and it's uncomfortable to live in, then there could be a really big difference. You want to make sure you're across that.
Such a good point. All right, our second question. A little bit more detail in this one, a little bit more specific to individual requirements, but, you might relate to this. So I'm living at home, living with my partner at home, I presume with the parents, and have been earning a full-time income for the past 1.5 years and have saved for a deposit. I want to buy an investment property as I don't intend to buy a home to live in at this stage in the location that I'm in. I'd also like to make use of stamp duty waiver grants as the property value fits in this scheme in the state, which is in this case Tasmania. Should I use first home buyer grants and live in the property for 6 months, pay the mortgage for myself fully and then rent it out to tenants? Or should I buy as an investment property and have tenants, the rental income straight away without using any government stamp duty waiver fees? I am also considering that if I purchase as an investment property, I'm able to get tax deductions off it as well, while I'm unable to if I purchase it as an owner-occupier. Please note that I'm a medical professional, so I'll naturally have LMI waived due to the registration, professional registration, and a lot of banks will happily lend to doctors and the like, right?
Careers.
And that only need a 5% deposit. So a bit of a complicated backstory, but we've got an answer here that we hope will help anybody that is in this situation.
Yeah, and look, this is a little bit outside of our lane, so we're not going to give a definitive answer here as always, but a spreadsheet could be really handy. It could be a way of putting all of these things down and actually calculating the difference in cost between the two options over, say, a 12-month period. But as always, when it comes to things like this, you need to talk to an accountant because there are so many implications from a tax point of view that need to be considered here. All right, so remember, one of the things that can impact you if you have an investment property is you end up paying capital gains tax at the end. Whereas if it's a home that you live in, it's never an investment property, blah, 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 lots of rules, regulations and so forth, it's probably going to be capital gains tax free when you sell. So really, really, really important to get advice, not from a Facebook group forum, but from a professional who will look at your individual circumstances.
But if you never intend to occupy this property, you can buy anywhere in Australia. which might actually be a better option for a long-term investment property than buying in Tasmania. Now, particularly if you're going to stay there and you're going to buy your home at some point and you're going to be there. Australia is a much bigger than Tasmania, and there's a lot of opportunities to buy in other markets right now. Obviously, you'd need to factor in buyer's agent fees because, as we always recommend, that if you are not going to be buying where you are able to inspect properties yourself and learn this process yourself, then it's always good to get a local specialist buyer's agent, not a remote one. And you can absolutely reach out to us via our website, via Facebook group, however you want to reach out to us. You can reach out to us if ever you need a recommendation for one. But you really do need to think to make sure that you've got a long-term plan, right? The thing is with investing, and if you decide that you're never going to live in it, I'd check on that 6 months as well. A lot of people think that they only have to live in it for 6 months if you're going to buy it in Tasmania or back to Tasmania now. Just check on that because a lot of people make this assumption at 6 months, but for some grants, it's actually 12 months and you have to move in at some point within the first 12 months. So it varies state by state, but there's also federal grants and they have requirements as well. So you need to make sure you cover off all of those things. So
and the grants, Veronica, have different a different set of criteria and rules to stamp duty concessions.
Yes.
So don't assume that just because a grant has a certain set of you must move in by here and live in it for that long, the stamp duty concession can be quite different to that. So make sure you're across all of that.
Yeah. Now, we also said that you should be speaking to an accountant if you're thinking about investing and working out these alternatives, but you should also talk to a mortgage broker about a borrowing strategy that does allow for you to change, from being an investor to being an owner-occupier. And also, if you keep that property and buy another property for you to live in, again, that a borrowing strategy that allows for you to do that in whatever future things that you might have. You want that flexibility built in and you don't want to sort of back yourself into some corners. You certainly don't want to buy an investment property now that doesn't allow you to do that at some future point, that hamstrings you from being able to buy your own home or move into it as your own home. So these are really important considerations why it's really important to plan.
Think ahead. I know we're talking about what's going to happen in 10 years, what's going to happen in 20 years. Things might change, but if you've got a plan and you're working towards that plan, then you've got a bit of an outline, a little bit of a roadmap. If something changes, you can then say, all right, well, that no longer suits me. The impact of the new decision is this, this, and this. But at least you're heading in a certain direction.
It's also the flexibility that's built into that plan. And that's the thing that quite often if you don't, particularly with borrowing strategy, if you don't have the sort of the right structures and the right setup at the first place, you're sort of cornered, so therefore a really good borrowing strategist, a mortgage broker who can do that for you is going to sort of consider what might happen and make sure that you've got opportunities to move or pivot in different directions.
Okay.
And you should also check out, we did a little rent vesting series podcast. It starts with episode 205, I think, from memory, it was 205, 207, 211, I think. But if you were thinking about rent vesting, you should definitely check out those 3 episodes.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, question 3 that has come out of the Facebook group is it better to push our budget to get a, say, $1.1 million apartment in Narrabeen, Newport or Freshwater, or stay under our comfortable budget of $850,000, also making use of first home buyer scheme, but having to squeeze our family into a super small apartment in DY. We live in the Sydney Northern Beaches area and our daughter is already enrolled in high school for next year. Thank you kindly, and we thank you for your question.
We do. Firstly, apologies as we're answering this in January and your daughter probably is about to start high school about now and we're only just getting to the question. So apologies about that timing, but you might not have made a decision, or for others who are thinking of these types of scenarios, do we sort of keep ourselves under a threshold to make life easier financially? But the real question is that really making life financially for us better financially and in other ways? And we really, before we go into the answer here, we just encourage you all to buy the course so you can get access to us and get timely answers, because we do meet students every single Wednesday and answer questions, right? Face-to-face, live. So if you want, these are great.
Live online.
These are great live, but in real time, us talking to you in real time on Zoom. Anyway, That said,
Yeah, it kind of sounds like they might outgrow that apartment
It
really
does.
quickly. And if they've got a teenage daughter, I don't know, a small apartment, teenage daughters, there's hair, there's makeup, there's all sorts of things going on. Friends
Study
coming
desk.
over,
Yep.
all of the, you need your space, you need your quiet time. Everybody needs to get away from each other every now and then when you've got a teenage daughter, Veronica.
Even though the teenage daughter does disappear into the room for about 4 years, that does happen, but that is you
It's by the by, but we do jest. But one of the lessons that you've shared with us many, many times is making that trade off and saying, I feel comfortable at this lower price, so I'll just buy this little apartment. And you outgrew it in less than a year.
I did.
So it actually cost you more money to buy into it and then to sell it and then buy into the next one than if you'd push yourself, still financially capable. I'm telling your story. I hope I get it right.
That's fine.
Still financially capable, but, a little bit less comfortable to get into something better that will last for a much longer period of time.
And some people get stuck in the smaller one when if they just sat back and thought we could have actually done it. And, pushing ourselves does feel so risky when we've never had a mortgage before. But if it is affordable, even if it does feel that bit uncomfortable and you'll be more comfortable living there for longer, then we would encourage you to really consider stretching yourself, because in the long term, you're going to get a lot more joy out of living in that place, and you're going to get a lot more living out of that place as well, and a lot less regret.
Actually, that's so true, because we often talk about, the financial aspects of buying your first home, but there are a lot of emotional aspects to it as well. We're not just talking about an investment. We're talking about your home, where you gather, where you play board games, where you cook for each other, where you have people visit you. So you've got to really, really take that into account as well. So that's the heart side of your decision making. And then you've got the head side of your decision making. You've got to bring those two things in together, because if it's all about the head, then you might miss out on some of those personal aspects, those emotional aspects that you really would or wouldn't enjoy about living in a property. And I think that's equally important when it's your home.
It's very important, because you are living with those emotions a hell of a lot longer than you're living with the sort of the head part of trying to work out what to buy. This feels painful, but really once you're there, you that bit's done. Then you're living with the consequences of it. So I think it's really important.
The actual living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is where it counts, So it's really important to always be thinking about that when you're buying. Emotion is very important in property buying. And it's funny, there's this common wisdom, if you want to call it that we should, ignore the emotion and make sound financial decisions. But it's only sound if it works for you. Otherwise it's actually costly, because you're going to regret it and you're going to undo it at some point, and that's going to cost. So, all right. Question 4.
I think you're up.
My turn? Okay. I'm looking to buy another Sydney one. I'm looking to buy an investment property in Sydney. This is the Sutherland Shire, under 800,000 to avoid stamp duty. Sound familiar? And we'll live in the property for the first 6 months. Sound familiar? There's a bit of a theme going on here.
There is, isn't there?
I have 10%, so we'll pay LMI. However, I'm not paying rent at the moment and saving a fair bit. Do I keep saving, or do I get on the ladder as fast as possible, as soon as I can? For context, I'm living with my partner who owns, and after living in the property for 6 months, to avoid the stamp duty and the capital gains, I will go back to living with him. Sounds like a good plan, doesn't it?
It does sound interesting. And you know what? I love the creativity that some first home buyers engage in. It's like, how can I get the best out of every part of what's available and get the long-term, part of
How can I milk it?
life and livability? Yeah. And some of that creativity is really, like, I wouldn't have probably thought like this. I was just, what's the maximum I can afford? Where do I want to live? How do I find something that's going to meet my needs? Do I get anything as a result of those decisions, as opposed to the incentives and the discounts being my guiding light towards the decision? Do you know what I mean? Like, so
They didn't exist when we bought our first property.
oh God, no.
So they weren't there to mess everything up for us, like
Our brains.
wasn't that free money that we feel like we should be grabbing. But I think, if you go back and listen to a number of our podcasts, you will know that we really encourage you to think about all those benefits as the icing on the cake, and don't limit yourself into buying an asset that's not a great asset in order to qualify, because that's a false economy.
Yeah.
But the first thing on the answer of this one, I really need to pull them up. Again, they're working on the assumption that they only have to live in it for 6 months. But in New South Wales, you must move into the property within 12 months from settlement and live there for at least 12 continuous months.
Yeah,
So it's really important that people get the actual requirements very, very clear, because that could make a change to the plan here, right?
Absolutely. And again, going back to what we said earlier, the incentive or grant that you're looking at may have different criteria to the stamp duty concession. So make sure you know both of those things before you make a decision.
The partner could actually move out of his home into her home, and they could live there for a year, and he would actually get capital gains tax free exemption because he's not buying another principal place of residence. Maybe that get accounting.
Well, there's another
I'm
way to
just
look
being
at it.
creative here. Anyway,
Talk to your accountant about that.
they could pop back and forth. Anyway,
Because that will have implications, right?
yeah,
Talk to your accountant about
this is not advice. It
idea.
is not
an
advice.
idea.
All right.
Now, the next thing to consider is, can you actually get a good asset for under $800,000 in that area? I don't know, Veronica, can you?
Well, potentially, and if so, great. Go ahead. Find one.
Go
Get
now.
on the market. Just do it. But if not,
As long as it's investment grade.
yes, not investment stock, very different, but a really good A-grade asset, right? You want a really good property, right? But if not, then yeah, you should save until you can afford to get a good asset, because there's no point just getting on the ladder and buying just anything.
Mm.
It
Just want to know
also
what we're backing.
might mean paying some stamp duty, right? So in New South Wales, as is the case in many states, you've got a sliding scale. So whilst up to 800,000 in Sydney happens to be stamp duty free, it's there's a sliding scale up to $1 million. So up to $1 million, at $1 million, I should say, and above, you pay full stamp duty. But anywhere between 800 and $1 million, you pay less, you get a discount, right? So it's a discounted rate. So you still pay a little bit of stamp duty, but not the full amount. So that might be worth exploring, because, you talk to a broker about what your borrowing capacity is, look at your savings rate and all the rest of it. Look at the LMI that you would have to pay. But if another 150, 100, 150, 200,000 makes a difference, a significant difference in terms of the quality of the asset, then you should definitely consider doing that.
Just on that LMI, I noticed that they have nominated 10% LMI. Have a talk to the broker about that, because there is a bit of a sweet spot at 12%.
12%.
Yeah, so the amount that you need to save, when you compare that to how much extra you pay in LMI, actually sits in the LMI favour. So it is a spreadsheet, definitely a spreadsheet type of activity that you need to do. But just have a talk to a broker about that, because they'll be able to give you some guidance, and that may be where you find that extra money.
We actually did an episode with the mortgage broker, Cara Haynes, back in episode 201, where we talked about what to consider, all these sort of little levers you can pull if you've got less than a 20% deposit, which, let's face it, nearly everyone has. So I highly recommend you go back and have a listen to that one. But also, before we wrap up this question, have a think. What if you break up? We are here as the older women, as the mums on your shoulder, to say that whilst we hope you live happily ever after, and you might, because some people do, but we are testimony to show that it doesn't always work that way. So what if you break up with your partner and you decide that you want to live there? Can you afford to buy a place that you'd want to live in that's also a really good investment? So it's just something to think about in the back of your head. And I'm not trying to put a seed of negativity in there. I'm trying to put a seed of pragmatism in there. That's all. Just something else to think about.
Yeah, and that's based on life experience and good advice. I think also I'd add to that don't let that decision be the driver for an investment property. How many times as buyer's agents, Veronica, we have had people say, as investors,
Oh, yeah,
but I wouldn't live in it.
Yeah. It's like,
need to want to live in your investment property.
but would you have
to want to live
if
in
you were
your
in the same demographic as your tenants? Yes, exactly right. Yes, very true.
Just keep that in context.
All right, question 5. Over to you, Meighan. Another Sydney one, actually.
Lots of Sydney ones, yeah. If you have if you have 600,000 for an owner-occupied purchase, where are you looking in Sydney? Oh, wow.
The answer is not a lot. It's before we get into this, because this will change. This will, this will carbon date this episode actually, because as at January 2025, that door is closing really for first home buyers. But the big question,
closing in Brisbane.
Yeah, it's closing in a lot of places actually. The big question really is how much space do you need and what sort of commute? Because it might end up being that you're not going to be buying a place to live in, you're going to be reinvesting. If that is it for you, if that is the most amount of money that you are able to get, it will, and you cannot buy something that's going to suit you and suit your family if you have one, your stage of life, all the rest of it, then you draw a line in the sand and go, I'm not even going to think about buying a home in Sydney. I'm going to move on, right? If, however, you're in the beginning of your savings journey or you're trying to stay under a threshold or whatever, there's other reasons why this is your limit, then I would encourage you to potentially think a bit broader. But I did this
interesting exercise.
I did. I had a look into Meighan, right? So, and you can type in Sydney region. Right, so you can actually look at everything that's available in the Sydney region, and I typed in a maximum price for 600,000 because I thought, I'm curious about this myself. I sort of had a gut feeling, but I thought let's see.
Let's go to the evidence.
And so this is an exercise anyone can do in any location, actually. So 2,147 properties came up. I thought, yay, that's pretty exciting, right? 114 houses, that's pretty amazing. 1,740 apartments, 11 townhouses, and 258 blocks of land. Well, we got rid of the land. So of that 114 houses, let's start there. Most were actually townhouses or villas that had been labelled incorrectly by the agent when they loaded up the listing.
That old nugget.
Yeah. So of the 114 houses, there was bugger all houses, right? There was a handful of old cottages in the Blue Mountains.
Yeah, it's nice for on a main road too.
I didn't even go into that. They're literally in the Blue Mountains. They weren't even in Sydney. So when you look in Sydney region, it includes Central Coast, Central Coast, Blue Mountains, all of Sydney, right? So a handful of old cottages, Blue Mountains. So you're not buying a house. That's basically what that says. So then I go to the 11 townhouses, add in the 100 or so townhouses and villas that were in the wrong category. They were all in the western suburbs and the outer western suburbs as well. And many of them had a price range on them. So even though they came up with my search for 600,000, the price range might have started at 6 or just under 6, and the upper end was above 6. So in order to expect them to sell at 6 or less, highly unlikely. All right, so I think we rule out townhouses, we rule out houses, which leaves 1,740 or 1,740 apartments. Now, if you're a family, you're going to need a 3-bedder. There's 38 3-bedders. All of them in the western suburbs. And again, quite outer western suburbs. There are 848 2-bedders. I'm not even going to the 1-bedders. I'm not suggesting you buy a 1-bedder. Unless you are an absolute committed singleton, never going to partner, doesn't need to work at home. 1-bedders can work for some people, but you've got to really be very confident that that's a good life choice for you. So of the 848 2-bedders, they're all across Sydney, right? Now, not necessarily the inner suburbs. I'd say probably from 15, 20K ring out, but they in all directions. Western suburbs, Sutherland Shire, Parramatta, Norwest. So there's quite a lot of scope there, and there's a number of different directions you could go in and check out different areas. Yeah. Having said all that, what we always say, I'd avoid brand new. I'd avoid looking at areas that are oversupplied, like I said, Parramatta.
Which is an irony. I know it sounds like an irony, but
it does.
There's a cookie cutter with a whole lot of other cookie cutter 2-bedroom apartments all around you.
That's it. You've really got to look for sort of infill sites where there's still lots of houses around. You look at the best suburb I could find with the best public transport links to the city and those that are in a nice part of that suburb. And there's a bit of hunting to do, but that's sort of how I narrowed it down. Your best bet's going to be a 2-bedroom apartment in, say, the 20 to 30K radius of the CBD.
Now, a really good way to put that into context for yourself is to look at your 3 Ps, your position, property and price. And if you've done the Where to Buy tutorial, which is only $39, that will help guide you through that process. And part of that process is actually doing some of this online searching, because the last thing you want to do is say, right, I really want to live in that suburb. I've got 600,000. And then you spend the next 12 months disheartened because nothing comes up in your price range.
Yeah.
It just doesn't exist. So it's really important to get the context right at the start, to understand what your priorities and compromises are, and then to look for the areas where you can actually achieve what you need in your budget. And that will guide where you start to do your searching.
There is a process here, and we teach the process. It's amazing how liberating learning how to think through this is, and how it can untie you from this endless sort of limbo that's going on around your head all the time. So that's why we put the course together, to help people move forward in a really positive way and avoid making all those mistakes. So have you joined our Facebook group yet? Because these questions came from our members, and they are impressive questions, and I love the questions. The Facebook group is called Your First Home Buyer Guide Australia. It's your opportunity to connect with us and ask us your questions. You'll get answers from us, like today, which means that you can be sure you're not going to get led down the garden path.
And a quick note, you might think we cover everything you need to know in these podcasts, but a word of warning, we don't. We just scratch the surface and help you to think about what you need to think about here. If you really want to be an educated first home buyer, you need to learn all of the steps and how to do everything in the right order.
And I know that sounds like a lot of work, but it's actually not. It's much more work trying to work it out yourself based on us and other podcasts you're probably listening to. We simplify it for you and really, really streamline it and make it really super clear. You know, our First Home Buyer Guide course only costs $990, and you get direct access to us to help guide you through your negotiations and ask these sorts of questions to us directly. You can also share the link of any property you're thinking of buying, and we can help you work out whether it's A, B, C, or Z. No-go zone. And trust us, we're real estate agents. You will buy better with our guidance, and you'll overpay if you are left to your own devices, and you'll overpay by a lot more than $1,000 if you don't know what you're doing.
In this episode, we've only touched on a tiny part of the huge amount of things you need to know to become an educated first home buyer. There is so much more for you to do. You can learn all of the steps in the right order and avoid all of the mistakes that others have made in our 10-step online course for first home buyers.
If you'd like to learn more about the right process and avoid making rookie errors, become an educated home buyer. Head over to the website, check out Your First Home Buyer Guide, the course that we have created for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. It helps other people find us. And of course, I know it's a bit cringy, but we're going to ask for 5 stars. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you've found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with more priceless stuff.